Welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast, where we discuss business solutions to help listeners develop and implement action plans for true lean process improvement. I am your host, Patrick Adams. Hello and welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast. My guest today is Rich Sheridan. He is the CEO and Chief Storyteller at Menlo Innovations. He's actually a returning guest, so he was with us back in Season 1, Episode 49. But if you don't know Rich is a successful entrepreneur and author of 2 best-selling books, Joy Inc., How We Built a Workplace People Love, and Chief Joy Officer, How Great Leaders Elevate Human Energy and Eliminate Fear. Rich's passion for inspiring organizations to create their own joy-filled cultures has led him to address audiences across the world through 4 continents in 18 countries and counting, as well as throughout the United States. I've actually had the opportunity to see Rich speak to a couple different groups, and just love what you have to offer, the value that you provide to people at conferences, but also by opening up your business, Rich, and offering tours to people to come and see the amazing culture that you guys have at Menlo Innovations. So welcome to the show.
Great to be with you again, Patrick.
So last time that we were together, Rich, it's been a little while, but we had some really, really great conversations. And the one story that sticks out to me from our last time together was the story of the individual in McDonald's. And I love that story. I love the idea of how, as leaders, what we do, our actions, our behaviors can rub off on people. And some of that can be good and some of it can be bad too. So I want to talk specifically about the good stuff. But, today we're going to talk about storytelling, and we're going to dive into this topic a little bit because it's one of the things that I think sets Menlo apart from a lot of companies out there. And the fact that you guys have a chief storyteller and you are the chief storyteller. So why are you called the chief storyteller at Menlo?
It connotes one important thing, that storytelling itself is important here. And the team anointed me the chief storyteller because I lead, and certainly in the early days, I led a lot of the tours of Menlo. We typically these days ignore the pandemic, of course, because all bets were off then. We get between 3,000 and 4,000 people a year who travel from all over the world just to come see us. And on those tours, we tell stories. And given I was leading a lot of those, I was telling a lot of stories of our past and our triumphs and our tragedies and our future and our vision, that sort of thing. But over time, I couldn't do all the tours anymore. And so they started pairing me like we pair a lot of people here. And what was fun was to hear 2 versions of stories from team members. One was their version of stories they heard me tell. So they were retelling stories. And that was fun to listen to. But then they started telling their own stories I'd never heard or been aware of. And I began to understand that we had created a culture of both storytelling and storytellers, simply by the virtue of the fact that all these people are coming and visiting. But it really dawned on me how important all of this was when at one point I was getting some feedback from a team member, and he remarked that every time I got near him with a tour group, he would stop to listen to the stories that I was telling. Same stories often over and over and over again, but he wanted to hear them again. And I realized this is maybe the most important point of storytelling, particularly the way we use them on tours, for example, that the stories, yes, are for our guests, but perhaps even more importantly, for the team members who overhear the stories while they're being told.
So true. Yeah, I love that. And I've been able to hear many of your stories, as I mentioned, in the intro here, not only while I was at Menlo, but, again, also hearing you speak and being on the podcast. So I've heard lots of the different stories. storytelling is something that I think it's powerful because it engages the audience, and for those of us leaders in organizations who really need to engage the audience around and get the team aligned towards maybe a goal or something like that, engaging them and getting them really bought into the change or the initiative or whatever it might be. I mean, stories can be a big part of that. And we talk about creating a compelling story for change whenever we are initiating some kind of a change transformation or anything like that. A lot of times you hear the term like a burning platform, and I don't really like that very much because it almost creates like this fear, and like we're telling a story to like scare people as much as we can to get them to change. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Like when it comes to telling stories, I mean, should you be trying to use stories to create fear in people, or is there a different way to engage people into change for the better? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, on the subject of fear, and I write books about joy, I think if I was going to write an opposite book about Menlo, it'd be called Fear Inc., not Joy Inc. So you might guess where I fall on the using fear as a motivational tool spectrum. I fundamentally believe, and we have a poster on the wall here that says fear doesn't make bad news go away. Fear makes bad news go into hiding, and now we can't manage it anymore. And I would say the lean community, when done well, the lean community understands that better than anybody, right? This is why we use visual management systems. This is why we go on Gemba walks. We want to see the real stories as they're playing out. And I think stories ultimately, the stories we tell of the past should remind us of why we're here. Should remind us of what's important. And, we're going to tell stories of failures in the past, not to create fear, but to remind us, why is this so important? Why we're doing things the way we're doing them. Particularly if things like here at Menlo, things go pretty darn well most of the time in terms of the work we do. And we tell stories of the past, some of our most dire situations, because we've only had a couple of big emergencies over the past 22 years. And we tell the stories because if you never experienced emergency, you don't even know what it's like and what it's about. And why are you talking about emergencies if we don't have them? It's like, oh no, we need to remind you why we're trying to avoid them, because software systems regularly have big emergencies, not the ones we create, but the ones out in the world. So we have to remind our team what's important. Why are we here? What do we believe? And then the stories about the future, I don't think this should be about the burning platform, because to me that, it conjures up the image of people jumping off that platform into unknown shark-infested waters or something. I think they should inspire. I think we should create a vision that people, want to work hard to help you accomplish.
So true. I'm 100% in agreement with you there. I've been involved with organizations where leaders do just that, and they create this vision for the future that people can buy into, that they can get excited about, and then tie in stories, success stories, like you said, things that actually have happened in their organization that support the direction that they want to go, or celebration stories of things people are doing today that are driving them closer to that. And so obviously that's for me, I agree with you. I think it's definitely the better approach than utilizing fear to try to instill change. But what about at Menlo? Specifically, why is storytelling such an important part of your company's culture? What made it, just such an important piece of what you guys do there?
I can remember back to the earliest days of tours, groups that would come in. And there was this one particular day where we had a big group coming in, and I was going to be leading this discussion with this group coming in. And for whatever reason, the day got away from me. And I was supposed to have prepared this presentation, and all of a sudden I see them walking in the door. They had food with them. They were going to spend dinner and in the early evening with us. And I had nothing prepared. And I was a little bit like, oh no, I let my day get away from me. And so I told everybody, I said, just walk around the room, take a look at what you see, think about what you're observing, and then we'll get started. And I basically pretended I had a presentation to make. And I said, hey, before we get started, does anybody have any questions? Hand goes up, another hand goes up. And in that moment, I started telling the stories related to the questions you were asking. And I realized that, 2 hours in, answering questions, telling stories, finally, the person who brought the group in said to me, hey, Rich, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to get to your presentation. We've taken up all this time with the questions. And in that moment, what I realized was what was happening was really compelling. Number one, they were consuming the information in the order they wanted to consume it. And the stories I was telling was exciting their imagination for the follow-on questions. So rather than me putting together this, stifling PowerPoint deck or something like that, the stories actually helped guide the conversation. And, I've, come to realize that stories are what connect, mind to spirit and, and concept to reality. And storytelling, if we believe strategy, or culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think storytelling sets the table for that meal. And for me, nobody wants to watch the PowerPoint decks. Nobody wants to see the boring Excel spreadsheets and the graphs and the charts and all that kind of stuff, because you walk away from that and you're like, what was the point? What were you trying to communicate to me, and how should I feel about it? But stories actually connect, I think that conscious part of our thinking with how we feel.
Absolutely.
Which is critical to leading people.
Yes. And I mean, humans are emotional beings, and the stories that we tell help us to connect with each other. Like you said, it made me, while you were talking, I was just thinking about an organization that I worked with at one time, where they were doing before and after Kaizen events in their areas, mostly like motion Kaizen. So they were trying to shorten up the distance that they were traveling, and it was completely driven by the employees that were working in each of these different assembly cells. And the leadership team there empowered the team to, take a picture of before and after and create a couple bullet points of before and a couple bullet points of after. And then they printed out these large poster boards and put them at each of the assembly cells. And then a couple weeks later, there was an executive tour that came through, and the leadership team at the site asked the employees in that area to stand and tell the story of the experience that they went through from start to finish of transforming their assembly cell. And, so everybody was quiet, and the team members, started telling the story, and you could see the emotions coming out of, like, first the pain that they were in and the challenges in the beginning, and then the excitement of having an opportunity to actually be involved in the change and be part of it. And then almost like a relief at the end of, like, look what we've been able to accomplish. And, and we're not done, and here's where we're going to go. And then the excitement of, what's next. And I just remember how amazing it was to just hear them telling their own story and their experiences. And it just seems like, just such a perfect fit to, just talking to the leaders out there, for not only utilizing storytelling to help your organization change, or to help them in a big way. And we'll talk about relevance here in just a minute, but also letting your team members tell stories and let them be part of the process of becoming storytellers. Right. Yeah. I don't know. Obviously you said some of you talked earlier about some of your employees starting to tell stories, their own stories, right? Yep. So similar connection there. Absolutely. What's the relevance of stories that, what kinds of stories, how do you know when, what story to tell or when to tell or anything? I mean, where do you go?
I think that part of that, Patrick, is simply the experience of having told so many over time. And also, almost like an improv theater type of atmosphere here at Menlo, where there's a lot of experimentation around stories here. In fact, I know now, I can probably, because we've been doing it for so long, you can almost tell when you're in the middle of a developing story. Right? I mean, I refer to it now by the term lucid story creation, or curation, not creation. So in other words, you're in the middle of a story, just like you'd be in the middle of a lucid dream, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I'm dreaming, I can control the dream. And when you're in the middle of a developing story, you start like watching for the details, because you realize what's happening right now is something we need to capture, we need to curate, and we need to tell again and again and again, because people in the future will benefit from what's happening right now. Because I think too often in a continuous improvement kind of culture, often the pockets of improvement can be just that. They can be pockets. They don't get translated to other areas fast enough. And you think, well, I guess we should form a committee to write a policy on taking what we learned here and implement it over there. But what's interesting is how fast things can move when you capture it in a story and you retell that story to others. Because I think the best part of storytelling, when you do it well and when you practice it over and over again, you get pretty good at it, is the audience starts to place themselves in the story. There's that mirroring neuron effect where suddenly you can feel the emotion of the person telling the story. And if they're excited, if they were anxious, if they were felt, exuberant because they accomplished some big thing, you're almost cheering them on. But at a certain point, you're like, I want to have that experience too. And so you begin taking the elements of those stories and applying them in your own situation. And so the stories here could be stories of technical triumph, of design triumph, of, human conflict triumph, where, there were a couple of team members who were in conflict with one another. They worked it through. They sometimes they tell their stories together. Let me tell you how I was feeling. Let me tell you how I was feeling. And people start to see, oh my gosh, like I had a conflict like that last week. I could have used this kind of lesson to apply in the conflict I had, or I had a difficult conversation with a customer around that topic, and that story helps me understand how I should respond in that situation the next time.
The most dangerous phrase in our language is "we've always done it this way."
There are an awful lot of posers out there, people that do lean because they're mandated to do it. They think it will work.
How stable are you today? What are your goals? Are you generating small, simple improvements?
There are very few people that embrace lean with their full heart, head, and emotion.
Let's imagine that your current output is top-notch. Is that enough to stop innovating and stop reaching for more?
Patrick's book uncovers the essence of what those organizations look like and what the posers look like. Caution, are you in the fake zone or the real zone?
Order your copy today at avoidcontinuousappearance.com. Yeah, for sure. I love it. So Rich, I find myself sometimes telling the same stories over and over again when someone asks me a question and it's like the same story comes to mind, and I feel like I'm telling the same story a lot. Do you see that as a problem, that if someone uses the same stories to explain themselves, or should we come up with new stories? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there are good old stories that should be told over and over again. For example, we often tell the story of the founding of Menlo. How did it come to be? How did my co-founder and I come together? What were we thinking at the time? What were we hoping to accomplish? People want to understand the roots of their organization. And I think telling those founding stories over and over again, and the early successes and some of the early, struggles, those are important. We want to know lineage. We want to know, like, how did this come to be? And, there's a lot of famous visual artifacts here, our persona maps, our visual planning systems, our work authorization boards. We're a crazy software company. We use a lot of paper-based visual artifacts. And people want to know, why do you do that? Where did that come from? What problem were you trying to solve? And so there are repetitive stories here, absolutely. But I think the danger in only repeating the same stories over and over again is there's a little bit of, so is anything interesting happened lately?
Sure.
And so there is always that sense of you should be curating new, fresh stories as well, because, that is an indication of vibrancy. That's an indication of growth. That's an indication of change. And those stories are going to help capture that. And let us all be assured, every organization on planet Earth captured, or should have captured, a whole bunch of new stories in the last 3 years.
Absolutely. I would hope so. You mentioned curating. Organizing the story. If someone's listening in and maybe they want to tell stories, they want to make this part of how they lead. What would be your suggestions for how to organize a story? Like, how do you put it together if you're not maybe fluent in storytelling? What would you do?
Well, I think every storyteller should sort of develop their own style, and the only way to do that is through deliberate practice. I often suggest to people, if they want to practice telling stories in a much safer environment than work, just start reading nighttime stories to your kids, maybe enhancing the stories a little bit. The other thing I would recommend to new storytellers is watch people who tell stories who you really admire, and see how they do it. What was it about those stories that grabbed your heart, grabbed your attention? Was it the way they used their voice? Was it the pregnant pauses in the discussion? Was it leading up to some big, maybe surprising point? And I think storytelling is better when it's simpler, when you're trying to not tell every single detail, but just simply capturing the highlights. And the best way to get to this, I have found, is just simply start telling the story and then being sensitive to the audience reactions to what you say. See where they make connection with you, see where they are leaning on every word, seeing where they laugh or where they grimace or where they react to what you're saying, and just get a sense of your audience. And over time, I have various stories I tell where I can tell them in 30 seconds or I can tell them in 30 minutes, depending on what the nature of the story is and what the nature of the audience is who's trying to learn something. And so, deliberately practicing those stories over and over again. And again, picking safer audiences to begin with. Maybe it's your unit inside of your company. Maybe it's some people you go out to lunch with. And then over time, you start to spread your wings a little bit and tell those stories to others. And I have found a good litmus test for a story that lasts. And, you are yet another example of that today when you said, oh, that story of Mike at McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing, you've heard that story once or twice, maybe, I don't know. And you could tell that story fairly accurately, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though you've only heard it from me once and you weren't there. That's evidence of a story that's compelling, of a story that connects, and a story that makes a point. Because if you're able to retell the story, and it doesn't have to be accurate, the accuracy is far less important than how does the story make the audience feel.
That's right.
And so, I have this happen all the time now where people walk in and they'll say, hey, Rich, I was here 12 years ago. Tell them the story of the handheld diesel motor diagnostic tool and the rubber gloves. I'm like, you remember that story from 12 years ago. That's amazing.
Oh, that's great. That there's another thing that comes from storytelling that is right in alignment with what you're talking about. And that's the ripples that happen when you tell a story, because I'm going to be completely transparent here with you, Rich. The story of the red balloon, I've actually used that story a few times in presenting or talking with people when certain topics come up. And if you're not familiar with that, if you're listening in, everybody, you can go back to episode 49. Rich told that story as well. And again, I've used it. And so, you told me the story, and then I told the story, and I'll be honest that probably not all the details were correct, like you said, but when I told that story, I could see the emotions of the people I was talking to. I could see that they were feeling the same feeling that I had when you told me the story. So there's also ripples that come from the stories that are told, and again, how people use those to create joy not only in their workplace, but I mean the ripples can go even farther beyond the workplace.
And again, if I had told some version of that with PowerPoint slides and bar graphs and pie charts, you wouldn't have remembered anything, and you would have never retold the story, and there would be no ripple effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
But the fact that I could, and again, when that story happened to me, because I was there when it happened, and I had never heard of anybody using helium balloons to indicate, wherever there's a desk with a balloon taped to it, as the person at that desk is running an experiment, come talk to me about it. I was like, and then of course, what did I say to myself? Oh my gosh, this is a story, right? And then you just capture the essence of that story and tell it again and again and again. And I will tell you, that story in particular, Patrick, and I understand why you would tell it again and again, it has a lot of legs to it, because I tell that story once. I just gave a keynote to the Lockheed Martin Space Group out in Denver, and within a week I was getting stories from their director saying, "Hey Rich, I was in a presentation, people were presenting on their work, and I'm noticing up in the upper right hand corner of their slides there's this red balloon." And he says, "What's with the red balloon?" They said, "Oh, don't you remember Rich's talk? This is our experiment. We're running this experiment. We're putting on balloons on all the slides where we're talking about experiments we're running." And again, those kind of spontaneous effects of telling a 2-minute story and the effect it can have on a team of people like that is just, I mean, it is so compelling for me to hear you say that, for me to hear them say that it emboldens the storyteller, let me tell you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love it. And really what you've done at Menlo, Rich, with your team together, you guys have created this storytelling culture, because it's not just you anymore. There's a reason why you guys have a chief storyteller, because you have all kinds of storytellers at Menlo. You've created this culture. For those that are listening in that are going, I want that for my organization. I want that for my team. Any advice that you would give them on how to build a storytelling culture?
I would say the first best advice is get curious about people. And so the next time you sit down for coffee with maybe somebody you've worked with for years and you've collaborated with, but just sit down and say, "Hey, Patrick, tell me your life story." And I'll tell you, the first time I say this to people, and a lot of times the first time I meet them, because they want to start out with some reason we're getting together. They want to talk about what happened the last week or last month, or some project they're working on, or something they want to garner from me. And I say, hold on a second. I want to hear first about the person sitting across from me. Tell me your life story. And you're like, what? I said, yeah, tell me, where were you born? What's happened between that day and today? And, they'll pause and they'll be like, really, you want that? I mean, that's going to take a while. I'm like, I don't know. But, at least give it 10 minutes. And what's amazing that you learn when you do that is people pick in 10 minutes discussion of an entire lifetime the things that are most important to them. and you start to learn about human, which is the real critical aspect of storytelling. I love this quote from John Naisbitt. He wrote it in 1982, and it seems so appropriate today given everything that's happening in the world technologically with Chat GPT and AI and machine learning and all that kind of stuff. And he said the most interesting and compelling advances that are going to happen in the 21st century, he wrote this back in 1982, are not going to occur because of technology, but because of a greater understanding of what it means to be human. Humans, as you said earlier, we're emotional creatures. That's why we respond to stories. That's why we've built those stories into anthems of nations, right? There are stories we tell about our tribes, our nations, our neighborhoods, our schools, our communities. And we tell those stories because we're trying to create a sense of belonging, a sense of community.
That's right.
And so what better story to have another human being tell you than a life story? Because you're going to tell me the things that have happened along the way in your life that were really significant to you. And that way I get to know you as a person. Now, the next thing about storytelling, and this is the opposite of what people think about because I'm having you tell me a story, right, is to listen, to really understand. Because when I listen to you and I really understand your story, now you and I have a deeper connection. And very likely, and again, it's not always going to happen, you're going to say, well, Rich, tell me your life story, right? But now I can maybe tailor it to the things I've learned about you. Maybe can create some odd connections that neither one of us would have expected because there was something that happened in your life story that's very similar to something that happened in my life story. And that might surprise the two people to say, oh my gosh, we went through the same experiences early in our career, or we had the same bad boss or something like that, and in that way, now we're building a connection between us. Learning to tell your life story in various sizes and parts, which is a story you should be fairly familiar with because it's your story, is a really good way to begin the practice.
So true. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And being able to just start practicing it like that is, like you said, find a friend, find a coworker, and ask them about their life. Like you said, I think that's a great way to start practicing. Also, like you said earlier, practicing with your kids is another great way too. I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you that I got a little tired of the same book every single night with she's now 14, but when she was a little bit younger, it was like the same book every single night because she loved the story, but eventually I started to use voices, to kind of enhance it a little bit. And then I also remember when I started to replace the names with names of people that we knew. And then that was really funny. Just getting creative with it. But I mean, that's how you learn. Just start doing it. And, again, whether it's coworkers or your kids or whoever it is, being able to start telling stories. And then, like you have done, start figuring out how to build that culture, that storytelling culture. I love what you guys are doing at Menlo, Rich. And again, we could talk forever. I love having, this is obviously our second discussion. And again, we could go on forever. But I also want to hit on the fact that you guys are in a new building, right? You've moved your offices. I've been there multiple times to your old location, but now you're in a new location. Can you tell us a little bit about your new space?
Absolutely. Now we're excited to let you know that we have moved. We used to be in the basement of the Liberty Square parking structure right in downtown Ann Arbor, less than a block away from campus of the University of Michigan. We only moved about a block and a half further west from the Michigan campus. So we're right in the same part of town we used to be in, still on Liberty Street. But we moved up in the world. We actually have natural light flowing in our windows now. I would say sunlight, but it's still wintertime in Michigan, so I can only go as far as saying natural light right now. But we're delighted to have floor-to-ceiling windows. It's the same style of space. It's wide open. It's a noisy environment. There's no walls. There's no offices or cubes or doors, that sort of thing. I sit out in the room with everybody else just like I used to. But as I said, we're delighted to be in a new space and delighted to have natural light flowing in our windows now.
Very nice. So now has that, did everything from, as far as the visual artifacts that you had in your other look, did all that shift over as well, and everything is still being managed in the same way?
Yeah, except that, like I said, we all have stories from the pandemic.
Sure.
And of course, Menlo used to be this 100% collaborative in-person culture. And then it was, suddenly that week of March 16th of 2020, it was a 100% work from home culture. And it was that for at least 2 years. And now we're back to about 80% of the team in. So we now have largely in person, but still a hybrid environment. So the visual paper-based artifacts are still driving our projects here, and you would see those when you come to visit. But we've enhanced it with electronic versions so that the people at home can keep up on the projects the same way as the people in the room can.
That's great. And you mentioned coming to visit. I'll just drop a shameless plug here. First week of October, we'll be hosting the Lean Solutions Summit here in West Michigan. And on the third day of the summit, on Wednesday of that first week of October, we're going to take a group. It's actually limited seating, only 100 people, 50 on one bus and 50 on another. We're actually going to bus you over to Menlo Innovations with Rich Sheridan, and then also Zingerman's Mail Order with Jeff Leiker. And so, Rich, when individuals arrive there, can you just give maybe just an overview of what they can expect when they arrive at Menlo and have an opportunity to tour and see what you guys do?
Well, you'll be able to see, feel, and hear the joy of Menlo. There will be palpable human energy in the room because everybody here is in this big open space working to a computer, talking through the work that they're doing. We're a software design and development firm, so they'll be able to see actual software development in progress, which probably for the most part, people would say, well, that sounds really boring, but it's different at Menlo because we're working in pairs, 2 people sharing a keyboard and a mouse all day long. You'll see the artifacts that drive those pairings. You'll see the artifacts that actually drive the actual work and the planning. You are likely to, if there is no one in your group who's concerned about dogs, there's likely to be a dog or 2 in the space. That adds to the human energy. And we just, I have to do some math here. I would guess Menlo baby number 29 just arrived this week. George and his wife had their second child, little Joel. And I believe by the time you're here, Joel may be coming in with George every day. So there may be a Menlo baby in the room as well, which is one of our more famous stories.
Yes.
So yeah, you'll have a chance to really get in touch with what makes Menlo tick. How does it work? How is it organized? How are the simple, repeatable, measurable, visible structures and processes of Menlo exposed in the space itself?
Yeah, love it. I can't wait. Everyone also will walk away with your book, Joy Inc. And so they'll be able to take that away. Hopefully everyone that's listening is going to be at the Lean Solutions Summit. So you actually won't have to buy the book. But if there is someone listening that wants to grab Chief Joy Officer, your newest book, or if they want to go out and get Joy Inc., is that just out on Amazon? Is there any special place to grab that?
Anywhere books are sold, it's available in hard copy, in electronic format, and also in Audible.
Perfect. And if anyone wants to schedule a visit or come by and check out Menlo or learn more about what you guys do as a company, where would they go to do that?
Yeah, if they go to our website, menloinnovations.com, MENLO, they're right on the home page. There is a place to schedule your tour. We're starting to do public tours again for the first time since the pandemic. We've been doing a lot of private tours, but now we're opening it up again to the public for the first time in 3 years, which is very exciting for us.
Yeah.
Or if you just want to write experience@menloinnovations.com, send them an email and say, hey, I hear you guys do tours. Tell me more about them. And our team would be happy to discuss that option with you.
Awesome. I love being part of your huddles when I come, and everything that you guys do there is always great. Every time I come, I see something new that I learn. So it's always fun to come and visit. But I'm looking forward to seeing you in October. And again, we'll drop all those links that Rich just mentioned into the show notes. If you're interested, you can go there, get some more information. Rich, as always, it's great to see you. It's great to hear how things are going at Menlo, and just love the discussion that we had today about storytelling and how that's really changed the culture at Menlo in a positive way. So thank you for what you do.
You bet. Great to be with you, Patrick. And thanks for helping spread the stories.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. If you feel so inclined, please give us a review. Thank you so much.